And you are live.
Well, welcome to House Education. Again, Wednesday, March 26th, 2025. We received some testimony now from the Secretary of State's office to better orient this committee as to what comes next after we decide on, hey, these are our new school districts. That's in and of itself a big decision, but there's a lot of work that then has to take place thereafter, potentially not much in our committee, but in others. To sort of get a thoughtful understanding of that from our Secretary of State and staff. Welcome. You do an introduction and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Sarah Copeland-Hansis, Vermont Secretary of State. With me, I'm Lauren Hibbert, Deputy Secretary of State, and with us,
Sean Sheehan, Elections Director at the Secretary of State's office.
So we really appreciate the time and attention to this issue. We began thinking about the elections implications of the governor's proposal back when the outline and the structure of the proposal became public. It is clear that restructuring how our school districts are organized and bringing uniformity to how school board members are elected would be a significant change to the way we currently elect school board members and adopt budgets in the various configurations of school districts. I don't need to tell all of you about that wonderful mosaic that exists right now out within the state, because I think you're very well aware of it. But we wanted to draw attention to the fact that this is a significant change and will require some thought and some legislation in order to accomplish this in a way that makes sense for Vermonters. So we have submitted to you a memo that outlines many of the different considerations. And just for pacing, Mr. Chair, how much time would you like to spend on this right now? And would you prefer to have questions as we go, or?
It's these small decisions that are always so hard. Why don't you just go for it? We're good until 11 and we can even go. We only have committee discussion thereafter.
Okay, wonderful. So the governor's proposal was to create larger school districts, and then within those school districts to divide those districts into wards. Depending on how many school board members the legislature decides is appropriate per school district, that would determine how many wards need to be created within each of those school districts. We understand that the configuration of district lines is an intensely challenging policy and fiscal decision that the legislature will need to make. However, creating the ward lines within those new school districts is relatively more straightforward. It would require some time and technical expertise. And so those are some of the considerations that we wanted to bring before you today. Depending on when the legislature envisions this new election of new school district board members would happen, the ward lines would need to be established in law, signed into law by May 15th of that year. And so I'm giving you sort of the end of the process so that you can understand that if the intention was to elect new school board members in the general election of 2026, then it would be next May, a little more than a year from now, that those ward lines would need to be established by law by the legislature. We can certainly talk more, and the memo that we have here goes into much greater detail about the steps in the process that would be necessary to create those ward lines. I think it's important for you to understand some of the basic principles of apportionment, that those wards should be substantially equal in population, that those wards should be compact and contiguous, and that with only very rare exceptions should respect current municipal boundaries. The idea of splitting up towns in the way that we sometimes need to do to achieve proportional representation for the House of Representatives should be avoided if at all possible with these larger school districts. It simply adds a level of complexity to administering those elections that would be unworkable. We believe that a school district apportionment board should be established by legislation. Support for the school district apportionment board should include our office. We support the legislative apportionment board. We can similarly support the school district apportionment board. And you can also look for expertise from the Center for Geographic Information. And, you know, I would recommend that, similar to legislative apportionment, that the legislature also hire a mapping technician to help with that. If we roughly follow the legislative apportionment model, the school district apportionment board should have a chair and 4 or 6 members. Those members should have substantial understanding of Vermont geography, travel, social interactions. And I believe that the school district apportionment board would need between 2 and 4 months to complete its work. It is, and of course, the complexity of that really depends on how many school districts this body decides to move forward with. Ward boundaries, as I said before, would need to be passed into law by May 15th of the year that the election is to take place, in order to have time for candidates to pursue petitions and in order for elections administrators to have time to set up those new elections in our elections systems. And we would recommend that going forward, redistricting should happen every 10 years. And I would recommend it happen in the biennium following legislative apportionment, so that the census data is as fresh as possible, but so that you're not overly burdened by trying to accomplish 2 apportionments at the same time. Following the governor's proposal, the recommendation was for 5-member school boards. Obviously, if you choose to have a number that's larger than that, you should always make sure that it's an odd number. Each ward should have 1 school board member, so that each voter has the greatest chance possible of having someone who has common ties with them, who maybe lives in an adjoining community, in order to be able to be their representative to this district school board. When these school boards are established, there should be a mechanism for staggering of the terms. We don't want to elect everybody in year 1 with a 4-year term and then have all of them term out 4 years later. So we would recommend staggering with a couple of 2-year terms in that first cycle, and then 4-year terms overlapping after that. School board member elections. The administration's proposal was for these elections to happen in November. That is a significant change from the way most school board members are elected now, which happens anywhere between town meeting day and the end of May, depending on what school district. The means of electing school board members is also a significant change, because the November ballot is a universal vote by mail ballot. Every Vermonter would get their school board candidate on their ballot and would be able to vote in their school board election. Whereas currently, some communities have a paper ballot on town meeting day, other communities have an in-person meeting at some time later. And so, you know, we expect that the November general election would allow for much greater input from voters on who their school board members will be. We also would recommend that the school districts designate who the district clerk is, and that those clerks be town clerks right now who are experts in administering elections. This is another significant change from the mosaic that we currently have, because some school boards use a town clerk as their elections clerk and other school boards appoint someone who may or may not have any expertise in election law and administering elections. But it's important in this context with larger school districts for these elections to be run by the people who are trained and expert at running elections. So we would recommend that the designation of a school district clerk be included in some way in this legislation. In order to gain access to the ballot to become a school board member, there would be a petition process. The governor's proposal does not contemplate that being a partisan process. So this would not be getting access to the August primary. This would be more akin to filing as an independent to run in the November general election. And so we would recommend the timing of those petition filings to be late July to give time for ballot preparation. There's a mad scramble in our office post-primary to make sure that all of those primary results and all of those candidates make it onto the general election ballot correctly. So we would recommend that school board candidates have an earlier filing deadline, and that May 15th passage of legislation to enact this would give us time to allow for a filing period for potential candidates for school board.
Can I just add something there? It wouldn't just be for potential candidates. There's also an immense amount of work that would happen in the Secretary of State's office with our IT system and working with clerks. We would need to make sure that all of the voter checklists are appropriate and also that all of those lines are within our system. So it's work external for candidates to decide they want to run and to get the petition signed, but it also represents a good amount of work for our office after that May 15th until that July filing, and then obviously with the November election as our big deadline.
Obviously, election night reporting would happen through our election management system, much in the same way that many of you may go on our election night reporting system to see how your results are looking. As the candidates would be entered into the election management system, then the results of those elections would also be reported in the election management system. We recommend specifying that all of our campaign finance laws would apply to school board candidates as well. Yeah, I think that's it for school board. We would recommend that the legislature contemplate specifying the number of meetings that these school boards should have. And, you know, if there are a minimum number of meetings, we would also recommend that you consider requiring meetings to be held in the different boards within a school district so that any Vermonter has an opportunity to attend periodically in person without the inconvenience of driving, some vast distance across a larger school district. With respect to open meeting law, we would recommend that these school boards must follow the hybrid meeting requirements under the open meeting law. And because of the larger size of these school districts, we would also recommend that with respect to open meeting law, that we treat these the way we treat state bodies, which is requiring them to record their meetings, to hold them in a hybrid manner, to record them and to post those recordings. So we have included some observations here with respect to school district budgets. I think I'm going to skip over that in order to allow for a little more Q&A at the end. But you're more than welcome to dive in there and follow up with us if you have questions about the budgeting issues raised within this memo. And then I just want to talk a little bit about election fund allocations for the administration of these elections. Currently, because school districts have this complex mosaic, there isn't really any express statewide continuity in terms of how school districts help to defray the cost of administering elections. There's some communities where the clerk steps in and just does the school elections because that's the way it's always been done. Given that these would be larger school districts, that there would need to be a designated district clerk who would need to take in the petitions for candidates for school board in that district. That is a significant added workload for that school district clerk. It also potentially could be a significant added workload to all of the town clerks within that district, depending on how you move forward with the budget voting and the supplemental budget vote concept that was included in the governor's original proposal. I would just ask you all to be mindful that the additional workload to town and city clerks is potentially significant, and that it would be right and correct for the administration of these elections to be paid for by the school district or out of the education fund in some manner that seems equitable, so that clerks' offices can be adequately staffed in order to take on this extra workload. Additionally, there are some IT system modifications that will need to be done at the Secretary of State's office. We would and will, if this proposal moves forward, ask for an allocation from the legislature in order to make those IT upgrades. We are contemplating right now whether this will mean that we need additional staff support in the Secretary of State's office. And so I just want to flag that as a possibility. It really depends on a lot of the decisions that are made here, particularly with respect to, are we adding a potential extra election if there is a supplemental school budget vote that could happen at that local level. We, of course, will provide training to all of the town and city clerks and an extra support to those school district clerks, whoever is designated as the district clerk. And so there will be potential conversations that we'll want to have about funding both for those clerks and for the work of our office. Did I forget anything?
No, unless you want to dive into budgets for them. That's the only piece.
Would you like to dive into budget?
So 2 minutes on budgets.
Okay. So the governor's proposal contemplated an allocation from the state, based on weighted pupils, and that allocation in theory would cover the costs of a district operating its schools. However, it did contemplate a supplemental budget vote that might be taken on a district level in order to accomplish special projects. In the event that those supplemental budget votes are woven into your new school district format, it's likely that those budget votes would be at a time that is off cycle to any current election, which means that for the municipal clerks within that school district and to the extent that our office needs to support that work, it would mean adding an extra election to our already fairly busy calendar of elections. Right now, different communities adopt their municipal budgets and their school budgets in such a way that there really isn't a date that we could pick that would not add an extra election. And so it's worth contemplating as a committee and as a legislature, what is the way you envision these supplemental budget votes happening? And how do you want to structure that in order to allow for the greatest potential for participation on the part of the voters? Now, the school board member elections, being a November universal vote by mail, has the highest potential for strong participation by voters. If this supplemental budget vote were to happen at a different time of year, around town meeting day or sometime shortly thereafter, the way that you could accomplish the greatest participation of voters in that supplemental budget vote would be to opt for those to be also a universal vote by mail, where every registered voter within that school district would get a ballot on their kitchen table and would have basically 6 weeks to decide how they are going to vote. That is a significant investment. It is fairly cheap and easy to run an election if all you're doing is opening the polls at 7 a.m. or 10 a.m. and keeping them open till 7 p.m. and counting the ballots that are cast. It is a much more labor intensive and resource intensive proposition to do a universal vote by mail election. But it's a policy decision that you should make based on your assessment of what is the relative value of having, near 70% participation versus what we typically see at the municipal or school board level, which can be as low as 5 or 10% of the voters. Yeah, please do.
Just in terms of open meeting law and governance, we're recommending before the school district votes on their budget, the 5 members on that board, that they have informational meetings for the public. And we're recommending that one of those happen in every ward so that the public understands and can really participate in those decisions with the board. And similarly, with the supplemental vote, we're recommending an informational meeting in every ward before that vote is taken too. So as you're thinking about timelines, when the district gets the state allocation, when they have to take that vote on how they're going to spend the budget, and then they're going to have to call a question of, are we going to ask voters for a supplemental budget, assuming that that is a concept that continues. That all will take time. And then if the question is answered, yes, we want a supplemental vote, then there will be timelines within that before the question can go to the voters. Again, as the secretary said, really dependent on, is this an in-person absentee voting situation, or is this a universal vote by mail voting situation? Those are 2 different models that we have. And one of them just takes an additional period of time to get those ballots really ready for, we print all the time. We have to proof the ballots all the time, clearly, hopefully. Definitely. Let me just say that. Let me be affirmative. We do that. But having them mailed to every voter is an additional logistical hurdle, and it's not an insignificant one. So that really is the crunch post-primary to get ready for universal vote by mail. That would happen here too, if you choose to have universal vote by mail by supplement for that supplemental budget vote. So as we're looking at that, our office would really like to be involved in the timelines for all of those things. And a big piece that we didn't understand in preparing this memo is, when would those districts be ready to make decisions on their budget, and how, with the timing of the allocation and all of those things. So as those things become more clear, we're ready and willing to be at the table. We really think we should be to be able to help you decide those timelines. And we also think that the petitions for school board members needs to be somewhat separated from these budget decisions, right? We can't have the school board election at the same time that we're having budget discussions. So there needs to be some space. So that calendar, particularly on even years, is very tight. On the odd years, the supplemental school board budget, if it moves forward, there's more flexible time.
Mind blown, huh?
Honestly, yes, I wake up in a cold sweat every morning with just the sort of level of decision-making that we have to do just within the governance and all of that. This is a whole new level. And I'm sort of thinking of the system that we have, which is incredibly convenient for school boards in that, want to do a bond? Well, we can either do it as an even year in November, or we can always do it on town meeting day. this construct would be focused on November votes to sort of everybody be in the, then you only have an opportunity every 2 years. So that all sort of gives me angst, or using town meeting day with universal mail ballots. And I assume when you say that, you're only referring to whatever that school district issue might be, not adding on universal mail for all the other issues that might be on town meeting day.
That is correct.
The big hurdle there is town meeting day is not the same in every community.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not on the same day. So, and a very critical piece of election theory law is that every voter who's voting on the same question, those questions are called on the same day. Yes, someone might vote early, they might return their ballot early, but those ballots aren't starting to be calculated until the same,
Right.
tabulated
Right.
until the same day. So if we have a ward and town meeting is on the second Monday and the second Tuesday of March in some, and on the Saturday before in others, and in April in another, that creates a lot of confusion to that basic principle.
We never do anything in November on odd years. Is that fair to say?
That is
That
correct.
is correct.
If we, I'd like your opinion on whether this is something to do or not, but right now with even with our larger districts under Act 46, many places do at-large voting. At-large voting would remove the need to create wards. I see many problems with that, but I just wanted to get your opinion on
Yes,
at-large voting versus wards.
Can I
Yeah,
ask,
yeah.
is that the same as commingling ballots?
I was gonna ask about
Is that what you're talking about?
no, I think
No, I'm
the
saying-
question here is whether your school board members would be voted at large within this
Oh,
larger
okay,
school
okay,
district,
right, okay.
or whether there would be a voting ward.
Right.
And, if what we're trying to do is give Vermonters, equal access to be able to influence their school board member who is sitting on that board making decisions, we would recommend a ward system and not at-large voting. I think you could imagine, let's say there was a school district that was the area surrounding White River Junction, Vermont, right? White River Junction being that local population center could potentially elect 3, 4, or all 5 of the new school board members from within that community, because that is the easiest place to get elected and to find people who might be familiar with you. We think that, that folks in Woodstock or Thetford or, points south of there might also like to be able to elect a school board member who feels connected to their own community. So we would recommend using a board system.
One of the concepts pitched by the administration is that these should be semi-professional boards without a real definition of what that meant. Do we have examples of elected semi-professional boards? Or is it really sort of defined as to like how big your stipend is for being on that board?
I think as I read that recommendation, I was assuming what the governor meant was the amount of time that these school board members would be spending on that job. Obviously commensurate with that, the stipend that would be offered to a school board member.
They might also need a staff person full-time to help deal with correspondence and hosted website maintenance and all of those things. Those are things that definitely should be contemplated. The scope of work is large, and superintendents probably will continue to play a role there, but the board itself may need help, or that should be clear what is the superintendent's role versus the staff person's role. But absolutely, these districts are going to need new websites, communication tools with everybody. This is significantly larger than under the proposed, but even if it was 12 or 14, it's still is significantly larger than our current system, and our schools spend a lot of time communicating what's happening at the school board level, and we need to make sure that those resources are still available. So setting up the IT, making sure that there's hybrid meetings, there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be
Digital
accounted.
storage for the recorded meetings, so that people.
Public records requests.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes on.
Yes, it does. Committee, further questions? Yes, Emily.
Thank you. This was helpful. No big surprise to me in all roles I've had, but one of the advantages for all of us, I think, to contemplate less school districts in the state is to help streamline a process. And so I really welcome this opportunity to have that conversation. One of the things that I happen to be in a district that does use their town clerk as their school district clerk. It's a appointed elected position. I think it's appointed position, elected position. No, it's an elected position. And it has been really helpful, frankly, to have that. And so you wrote in here, the school district clerk could be the town clerk. Is there a way for us to be able to say in statute that it will be a town clerk? And is that advisable?
I don't see why.
We recommend that it is a town clerk. I mean, we didn't want to tell you what your policy decision is, but our recommendation is that as the town clerk, because they're so integrated already into the Secretary of State's trainings. They are in our system, you know, school. Let me just say, last year when all of the budgets were having some issues and we were supporting town clerks administering school budgets and school district clerks who were not town clerks administering school budgets. That is a communication struggle for us as an office. We worked really collaboratively with the School Board Association and Superintendents Association to get the information out. So it's possible, but particularly because this election of the school board member will be on the November general election ballot, it makes a lot of sense to us that the town clerk and the school district clerk are one and the same person's answering the question.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. That makes total sense to me. What I'm trying to get at is legislative district clerks are, I believe, in statute, we don't change them. It's based on which is the largest district. So tell me how that's done. And
Well, you all write the laws.
well,
so-
I am literally trying to see if there's a way to streamline this process so that we have the most efficient and effective model going forward. And we don't need to go too deep into this. I thought it was going to be
Also consistent.
thank you.
Consistent
Part of the
I'm like
streamline.
cautious from going.
Yeah,
deep
I,
into
it was
operationalizing
not
that
my
for a government
intent to
office.
do that. It really wasn't, but I'm just really want to stream.
Representative Brady.
Do you have any, appreciate the sort of, heads up of the cost potentially to resource these new clerk or existing clerks who are taking on bigger roles, some of the IT systems? Do you have any rough cost estimates of what some of these, like, as we try to keep in mind the cost of transformation as well?
We haven't really done a deep analysis of the cost. I think with respect to the November election of school board members, because that's piggybacking on top of a universal vote by mail election already, the impact there, other than IT changes, would be lower. The impact to the school district clerk, who would need to be taking in petitions for potential candidates for school board, those ward clerks or district clerks, is a significant added workload for them. And we can certainly, we haven't put together an estimated budget because there's so many moving parts right now that we really don't know. With respect to those supplemental budget votes, that is another question in terms of, what would that cost across the state? I mean, we can give you rough estimates of what it costs to mail a ballot to every voter. And you can break that down by voter and say, well, if this school district has, X hundred or thousands of voters, then, their supplemental budget vote is going to cost this to enact. But we need a few more variables to be nailed down before we can do a very good job of estimating the costs.
Rep. Toots.
Thank you, and thank you so much. I love this. I'm a big proponent of universal mail-in voting. I appreciate the hard work and thought you put into this. As I'm thinking about our timeline or my future, or my vision of what our timeline would be, you said May 15th of the year to have this set in place. Would it be too much to think that this can be done for next May to be ready for next November? Actually, yeah, for next
Yes.
November.
Right,
That would be it.
yeah.
2026.
It is possible. I think what would need to happen is that the school district boundaries would need to be set this legislative session. And the school district apportionment board would need to be established this session so that that school district apportionment board could do its work in, August, September, October, November of 2025
Yeah.
in order to bring a board boundary proposal to the legislature, which you would need to enact by May 15th of next year.
Thank you.
And assuming that that process was effective and rational, hopefully the wards would not be particularly controversial. But
And again, it's May 15th. I mean, we often don't adjourn by May 15th, and we often don't have things signed into law by May 15th. But that sounds to me like a pretty hard deadline.
That is the last possible date at which we could successfully hold a November 2026 election.
Representative Brady?
A different money question and like, it's a concern rattling in my brain or a reality I think we're gonna face that if we're moving to larger districts, whether it's 5, 14, 25, we're talking about bigger political divisions within our state. And actually, depending on where the number lands, probably the biggest below just statewide elections. So I'm trying to remember just from reading, maybe, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, like, so currently our Senate districts would be those largest. In the last election cycle, do you have a recollection roughly of what some of the highest races, not which candidate, but like how much was spent in terms of election, in those elections, fundraising, candidate expenditures? Because I'm then trying to sort of think, that's probably a proxy for what we would see if not on the low end.
we'll have to follow up with you, but we can do so.
I remember some headlines about, some of the Senate races reached new, and this happens everywhere, like every election cycle, things get more expensive. People spend even more on campaigns. I have a whole side comment about campaign finance reform that I will. But, so I'm just thinking about that entire ecosystem of the reality of the world we live in. And then that is then interplaying with school board elections in a way that it hasn't before,
Right.
in the state. And so,
Yeah, we can certainly get you some rough numbers of sort of the trends over time with
Yeah.
respect to those Senate races. And, I think the difference in terms of how this school district proposal looks relative to your Senate races is that House and Senate campaigns have to first win a primary, and then they have to campaign in a general. And in some parts of the state, all the heat is in the primary.
Yeah.
In some parts of the state, you are running hard from your filing deadline to election day. And so the fact that these wouldn't have that partisan primary may abbreviate the spending, probably will abbreviate the heavy campaign timeline up to some extent.
yeah, thank you.
So I'm just kind of figuring out how this all works. So let's say, I would say that most of us are not comfortable with 5, but let's say we had school boards of 11. So what we would have districts drawn that would have a certain population number. You would then sort of divide that by 11 and then create wards that would roughly equate to that quotient. Is that the right word, Matt?
Yeah. Depending on the size of those school districts, I could see a scenario with an 11-person school board where you might want to say 2 members per ward, so that you're not creating 11 tiny little pods. Because you'll recall that when I was talking about this ward apportionment, I said it's very important that we try not to break up municipalities. that adds a level of complexity and an election administration hassle that would be inadvisable. So it would be easier to create wards that took whole towns if you had a 2-seat ward in that scenario.
And in that scenario, you'd want one ward to be a little bigger, so we could have a 3-seat.
Right.
So we could continue to have an odd number because we need an odd number for the board to function.
Okay, thank you. I
Thank
think the
you.
committee needs at least a 5-minute break.
Yes.
Let their heads clear and digest
Well,
this.
we stand at the ready,
Thank you. Thank
when
you for that
you
offer.
put more flesh on this and want to talk more particulars, we can certainly help support you and your government operations committee, in doing some of these changes in law.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, let's be back in our seats.